Hey, Lily.
Hi, Scott.
Today we are going to talk about anxiety in our kids, which has been a huge thing for my son lately. And I'm sure you run into it constantly.
We have a very strong anxiety gene in my family. Comes straight from my dad, right through me, right into them. Yep.
Well, it's funny. My son's adopted, but he might as well be my biological anxiety son because it is the same.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's get this pod started.
Let's do it.
I'm Lily, single mom to teen twins.
Father! I'm recording in here.
And I'm Scott, single dad to a preteen boy.
Dad!
It's under the sink!
We're two old friends trying to navigate single parenting.
And spending the whole time thinking, I hope I don't fuck this up.
So we're going to be talking about anxiety, but first, let's bring up something else that's also anxiety-inducing, which is a parenting fail of the week. You have anything?
Yeah, and this probably speaks way more to my own childhood pain than anything my kids actually feel, but I forgot that I promised my daughter something. And it's like not a big deal. But as the child of divorced parents as well, like I have a real sensitivity around not doing the thing that you're going to say, because dads in the 80s who were single constantly like left us on the porch.
Really?
Waiting or like not showing up or not saying that they weren't going to come. Like I have distinct memories of my dad not showing up when he said he was going to show up. My daughter had asked, I just, recently started a new job. And my kids don't really like to get new stuff for school, which is lovely. I mean, I used to that was the only time I could get things. So that's all I wanted. But my daughter, after school had started, she's like, oh, I need new sneakers. And I was like, okay, baby, can we wait until I get my first paycheck? I was like, I promise you, we'll get you new shoes when I get paid.
Yeah.
And of course I forgot, because it's not my shoes. I'm not wearing them every day. She's not they're not shoeless. She chooses to wear the same sneakers all the time, which is fine. But she gets expensive ass Hokas. They're $200 shoes.
What is with these shoes? Oh my gosh. I don't remember. My shoes were Payless, or Payless didn't even exist back then. It was
they did. Believe me, because I shopped there.
Oh, was it? Oh, wait. Well,
yes.
I mean, this was in the dawn of time, but I remember they were so cheap. They were
well, I remember wanting Reeboks, and that was a big deal, and they were $80.
Yeah.
And I remember not one time I was allowed to get one pair of Reeboks, and it was great. But every couple of months, I'd say 6 months or so, I'm spending $250 on a pair of Hokas or whatever the thing is that they want at the time. Luckily, my son is into Vans, which are still pretty cheap.
I know. Thank God for those.
I was like, okay, I just need a breather. Let me get paid and we'll do it. And the other day, she was sitting on the couch, putting on her shoes, getting ready for school. She's like, oh, I've almost walked a hole through this one. Like a sad little...
Please, sir, can I have some more Hokas?
It was and I felt horrible because I had forgotten. And she was sweet girl that she is being thoughtful and not bringing up hey, I want to buy another pair of expensive shoes. Did you get that money? And I have. I've been paid several times since this conversation. And I felt so awful for having promised her something and completely forgetting and breaking that promise. And it made me feel really, really bad. So parenting fail.
Look, so my parenting fail wasn't this week, but was exactly the same thing, except worse. So this is how I make you feel better.
Okay.
Is that you just forgot some sneakers. We all forget that stuff. Half the time there are promises that you give to buy yourself some time. It's and I would fully expect my son to then come back to me and remind me
I would have done it every day. Is today payday? Today?
Exactly. You want that, my son would not be quiet about that. I'd wake up with his computer in front of my face with a picture of it on the computer. Because when he wants Legos, that's all he does. He's just, he's like, hey dad, come take a look at this fun video. And I look, and it's just the Amazon link to the Lego set he wants.
Well, this is why I feel even worse, because she's such a kind
soul. She's so good. She's so good about it. No, you are 100% forgiven. That is such my job in this podcast is to remind you what an amazing mom you are by showing what a crap dad I am. So he had a special thing at school where all the parents at the end of the year would come in and it was called paper plane day. Mm-hmm. And you spend all day, all week making these paper planes. He takes the paper planes into school and then you show up, all the parents show up at 2:00 at school. And I guess you just throw the paper planes around.
Okay.
And so, we work on the paper planes all week. We put it all together and then it's time to go. And he goes to school to go do the paper plane thing. And I had this fire happen with work. And so I'm like paying attention to that. And then next thing I know, I hear a door slam and he's home from school. Oh, and he just goes right into his room and slams the door. And I immediately, the worst part is I didn't know why he was mad. You didn't know
why why is he so shitty?
I know, I couldn't remember.
Yeah.
Because I just had forgotten it completely. And I opened the door and I'm like, what's going on? He does the little thing where he slams the door again as I open it. So I always have to watch out for my fingers. Uh-huh. And then finally I opened the door and I'm like, what's going on? He said, every other parent was there except you. You were the only parent not there. And then I was like, oh crap, it was paper plane day.
Well, did you say it's because I don't love you? That's obvious why.
No, I did not try to be glib about it. I felt so horrible. I immediately was just, because we had worked on these paper planes together. I knew about all of that. It's not like some little thing on the calendar that, you put on there and it's like, you don't think about it because you're not involved in it. It was so indefensible. And I just felt so horrible, but it's so difficult to keep all these things in your head. It's you got to worry about work. You got to worry about, your ex. You got to worry about what's for dinner and all this stuff. And that thing just slipped my mind. And the worst part about it wasn't that I'd forgotten. The worst part about it was I was the only one who hadn't forgotten.
It would have been really nice if somebody else also forgot.
One other freaking parent. I mean, I just wanted to call the other parents and be like, guys, come on. We should have a raffle where somebody just has to stay home just to make up for that one idiot like myself.
Well, also, how nice that all those parents can come to school at 2:00.
I live in a town with a lot of stay-at-home moms.
Well, you're always trying to provide tips for everybody. So I'll just give you one. Nothing in my life gets remembered unless it's in my calendar. And I tell this to everybody I know. I tell it to my kids. I tell it to my ex. You're not going to remember. Put it in your fucking calendar.
You're right.
I've got a dentist appointment that I'm not even taking my daughter to on Friday that I sent an in-calendar invite to her and her dad to remember, because it's just not going to happen. So obviously you're forgiven for forgetting. It's just sucks. But man, can't tell you that he won't be talking about this on his own podcast 40 years from now about how his dad didn't show up on paper plane day.
He brings it up. He brings it up all the time, and in such a manipulative way.
It's not manipulative, okay? And I used to get real. I would say things like that about kids too. Is this is manipulative. This is It's just he doesn't know what to do with those feelings. He has no idea, and still, my own father will bring things up to me like that. So it's a personality type that hangs on to those things, and the emotion is always so fresh that it keeps, my dad will tell me all of the time, remember that time that I took you on that trip when you were 14 and you were awful? I'm like, yes, Dad, I'm really sorry I was a teenager then. I hope you can forgive me. It's just some people.
We wonder why we're talking about anxiety today. So it's a nice segue, I guess, into the anxiety in our children, considering we just talked about how I cause anxiety in my child. My son's in therapy. I don't know if your kids went through therapy at all.
They're not, and I've asked them through the years, especially when I've noticed phases of I will start this and say they're not. It took me nearly 40 years to get any kind of therapy for my own anxiety because it didn't feel pathological. It just felt like my brain was trying to think of everything and protect me, which is a thing that I think in anxiety people generally have. It's it doesn't necessarily feel like anything's wrong. It just feels like you can't handle everything. And there's so many things that you need to be handling all of the time. So they're not in therapy, but I'm glad you have your son in therapy, because the thing that worked for me was therapy.
You think it worked for you last year was getting into therapy. You finally got into therapy. Well, and I'm laughing at you. I just started therapy for the first time. Last year I started it. And then, unfortunately, it was someone who didn't quite work out. Because the reason why I went with her was that she said that I could pay her in installments. And I said, oh, that's great. Let's do that. And that's not a good reason to go with a therapist, is because of the payment plan.
It's not great, but also an important thing. Like,
it honestly made me too, because I was going through so many financial issues. You go through a divorce. That bit of generosity touched me so much. Most people aren't like, this is their business, which I understand.
Yeah. But also there's no therapy late. Like, I was like, are you sure we need every week? Could we do like every other or once a month? And she was like, yeah, that's not how this works. Which I feel like it maybe could be how it works. And
I was doing it every month with her.
Yeah.
With the first one, I will say it just didn't work at all.
Yeah.
Partially, but it's also because your therapist is, if it doesn't fit, you got to dump it and find the one who does as soon as possible. It's not just about a good therapist. It's about who is someone who communicates in a way that you respond to. Because if you don't feel like you're responding well with them, or, you don't listen, like this for the first woman I was dealing with, she, the way she would approach things was just not a way that I would respond to it. So it just became a time to talk.
It's hard for a person with anxiety breaking up with a therapist, because
I know it's so difficult.
Oh my God.
I just ghosted her and I felt awful.
Did you? I ended up stopping seeing my therapist because I left a job that was causing me a great deal of anxiety. And she had, she helped me to come to that conclusion. But then when I didn't have a job anymore, it was hard to pay for therapy. And it took me a long time to quit, even though she knew what was going on. And I'm sure she would have been understanding much sooner than it took me to do. But it's in the expense is a significant consideration.
Completely.
I would absolutely put my kids in therapy now at my own not at the expense of my own therapy, so that they could do it, because all three of us, that's $3,000 a month.
I know, it's crazy. I mean, thank God my insurance can cover my thank great. God. It's a very special circumstance that won't last forever, but it's been life-changing for me. As you mentioned before, I might have ADHD, and it's kind of like taking me through this later in life diagnosis, which has been a huge change and help for me. But my son, his therapist doesn't take insurance. Yeah. So, I'm paying that out. So we do it once a month now with him rather than every other week, which is what we were doing. But there was the first bit of advice that my a good friend of mine who had gone through a divorce and was work with children, and the first bit of advice, she's like, get him into therapy, because the one thing that often happens in divorce is they feel like they can't be completely honest with either parent, because their experience is so different from either parent. Like, they don't know where they are. They need somebody that's theirs that they can talk to.
And what's interesting too, it not only is is it truthful or not truthful, or how, wanting to protect your emotions, but kids have different relationships with each of their parents, and they are different with each of them. As a child of divorce, I immediately am tense around my mother, who was the primary custodian when we were kids. We saw my dad on the weekends, but when I was with him, I was totally comfortable and relaxed and felt like myself. And when I was, when I was with her, Mom, I hope you're not listening. I get very anxious and uptight, and there was a lot of probably one of the first senses of anxiety that I had was I felt responsible for her well-being. Nobody asked me to, but when I was 8, they got divorced or they separated when I was 8, divorced by the time I was 10 or 9 or 10. And I felt very much responsible for her. And that was something that we were actively trying to parent against, as we were splitting up, we will handle this. The emotions that your dad and I have. Like, we completely did the opposite of what my parents did because I never wanted them to feel like they were responsible for me.
That really is amazing. I wouldn't be surprised as a non-medical professional that if we were to look at the root, a lot of this anxiety that children of divorce especially have is this sense of it's now my job to make my parents feel better.
Yep.
Because, and I bet you that happens with single parents in general, whether you're divorced or not, because it's like there's nobody to take the load off. It's just them.
And especially depending on the kind of kid that it is. Like, my daughter is like me, and if I had any inkling of like need, she would try to fulfill it. And my son is not that way.
Your son does not give an F.
He's a very loving and empathetic person. However, he does not feel the need to take care of me or his dad. And I'm glad for that.
That's good, I think.
It is good. It's really, really good. But it my daughter is the one that she's a caretaker. And like, I just don't want her to ever feel like she has to take care of me because she has like her anxiety, but both of my kids have anxiety, and not formally diagnosed, but having been through anxiety, literally seeing the genetic delivery system, like from my dad and like probably from his mom to my sister and I both, we each have different expressions of the anxiety. My dad and mine are very, very similar, and it's something we actually bond over. Because I think until I talked to him about anxiety and made fun of him, which is our love language.
Ours too.
I think it still was just something that made him feel bad. Like, he has been thinking he's got hypochondria, which is like a, particular subset of anxiety. And so like, if a friend of his had a stroke, which happened one time, and like I talked to him afterwards, he's talking to me about how she was in the hospital. I was like, so how's your stroke feeling? And like, I know him well enough to know, like, if that happened to somebody else, it's probably happening to me, and I just don't know it. And that's his anxiety, which is very similar to mine. And my son had a similar thing, where when he was around, I don't know, middle school, he suddenly would, his stomach would hurt, and he'd start looking up symptoms online, and he had cancer suddenly. And like, that, so he has a similar kind of anxiety that it's not necessarily instigated by anything external, but it's all self-directed. And my daughter's is more worry. Like, she's, constantly worried about if the train is late, if she misses this for school, if like, it's a kind of a low level general anxiety about everything. So it's, I'm almost glad that I know that I have it. I know that my dad has it. And in dealing with them with it, it's really easy. And I think they deal with it better than I ever did because it's acknowledged. And like, I say to them, like, this is what the anxiety is, and this is what, here's things that we can try. And and I actively like therapy them through it because, my therapist gave me tools to use when mine was out of control.
I feel powerless a lot of times. So my son has panic attacks, and he can't breathe, and like it's happened a couple of times, and then a few times I think he's now afraid of feeling that. And so even if he doesn't quite get there, it turns into that. Like, I watch him work himself up into it. And so it's like, part of me is like, how do we get him to stop, working himself into it? Yeah. But the powerlessness I feel when he's going through something like that, and all I can do is sit next to him, put an arm around him, and like, try to help him breathe and get him to the point where he can kind of get everything under control. And it's only happened maybe 3 or 4 times, but every time it's happened because of me.
It's the panic attacks happen because of you?
Because of me. Mm-hmm. And like, they're not about the world. They're about, the first time was because he likes to go into his room and kind of like go be by himself. And that's how he kind of self-soothes. And he ran into his room once, and this was like 4 or 5 years ago, and he closes the door. And then I went to go open the door and be like, hey, how you doing? He said, don't come in. He slammed the door on my fingers. And I was just like, ah! I mean, it really hurt. And so, and it was over something that was it was not like, he was like having a little tantrum. And so I then went in and I smacked him on the shoulder. I was just like, smack him on the shoulder because my hand hurt. it like broke this rule in his, like it just did something.
Yeah.
And he had this attack, and I had to, like, you know, obviously calm it right down and soothe him and everything like that. He has now brought that up, I would say, at least once a week for the past 4 years.
Yeah.
Like, talk about the thing that he is going to, you know, bring up in therapy when he's 60. It's going to be that.
I will say that might be some self-soothing too. Like when you, one of the things that I do with anxiety is like repeat bad situations over and over and over in my brain. I will walk, up, you know, I will walk down the street and I'll hear somebody laughing and I assume they're laughing at me, which in my right mind, I know is probably not the case. Or I have an interaction with somebody, like somebody at the grocery store did something messed up and like rolled across your foot and then were jerks about it. And then I will replay that incident over and over and over in my brain. And it's like your brain is just trying to process the intensity of like the overreaction of feeling that I have there. So it could be that, like, it could be like his brain is still trying to work through it. And it's not to make you feel terrible. And you're also safe. Like that was what, when you were talking about that, like that was one of the things, like I also had panic attacks, knock on wood. It's been a while since I had a last one, but the last one I remember was just at the start of the pandemic. And I'd been good for years. Like therapy had really worked. And I don't want to tell you to tell your son this, but the thing that happened to me in my panic attacks, I finally was like, all right, well, if I'm going to die, just go ahead. If this is a heart attack, there's nothing.
I'm not going to tell my son that.
You shouldn't.
Go with the death feeling. Just go with that death feeling, and you'll be great.
What I would always say was like, well, if this is a heart attack, my worrying about it's not going to stop it. So let's see. But one of the things that would always soothe me was my ex. Like we were very good in traumatic situations together, or like in all of the places that we should have been bad, we were good, and where we should have been good, we were bad. Like we were. It was not. I'm
sorry.
It's fine. It's fine to laugh at because it's just ridiculous. But if I was having a panic attack, he could help me, and like he was physically grounding, and like there's a lot of things that just his physical presence helped me with, and that was something that that now, like, luckily, panic attacks have not happened frequently in the past 4 or 5 years at all. But it is something that I think about, like, what am I going to do if I have more and I don't have him to, like, breathe with me or like hold my hands or remind me, like, okay, you're supposed to think about your feet, and are your feet touching the ground? Like all of the things that the therapist told me that I would tell him, that he would reflect back to me when I was in the middle of it. Or like, okay, you need to go into the room. We're going to turn on the air conditioner and make it really, like, whatever the things are that he would do. And it's not something I actively miss, but it reminded me, like when you went in there and soothed your son, that's something that is missing should it happen again as a single person.
It is the hardest thing when you're single and by yourself. I mean, I went through some stuff last year where it was just like anxiety on top of anxiety on top of anxiety, and you're just by yourself in your bed. And, and your kid is, you don't want them to help you. They can't help you because that's not their job. As we just said, they should not be, they should not be in charge of your well-being. So you're just there gutting it out by yourself, biting your lip, like trying to get through this thing. And, you don't have somebody who can help you, and you just have to get to the other side. And then you got to go and, it always makes me think of a movie that I have some problems with the movie, but Love Actually. There's that scene in Love Actually.
I don't have any problems with it. It's perfect and I love it. But go on.
God. It has some great vignettes. But that one scene to me is being a single parent. That one scene where Emma Thompson opens up the CD and realizes that the jewelry that was bought for her, that she had seen the receipt for or found the jewelry, was not for her.
Makes me cry every time.
So her whole life is now crumbling. And then she has to put on that face and go back out and be a mom for Christmas, right? And to me, that's single parenting, like in a nutshell. It's that you have that overwhelming sadness, depression, anxiety, whatever it is, that washes over you. You have to then turn around and go make breakfast, or you have to turn around and go help the kid with their homework, or whatever it is. I remember last year, like being like, this is something that married couples get to tag in like a wrestling match. And I need to go into the other room and deal with my own crap. And you go and you entertain the kids or help with homework or whatever, high five, off you go. And instead I'm like in my bedroom, not wanting to get out of bed, being like, it doesn't matter. I don't have a choice here. Like I don't want him to see, a tear in my eye. I don't want him to hear a quiver in my voice. Like I need to like somehow bottle this down and then go and be.
It's the scene in the bedroom that really is the one for me where like she goes in there and she like, let's go. Like, she absents herself a moment. Not that I know every line of this movie, but she goes she goes into the bedroom and like she lets herself cry a tiny, tiny bit and like then like straightens her clothes and fixes the bedspread. And then like you literally see her suck it up and go out there. And I'm not always great at that. And I don't necessarily think that that's the best thing to do, to not let your kids see your emotions. But in a case like that, where it's like, if they knew what was going on right now, it would ruin something for them. Absolutely. Like totally the right thing to do. I mean, it's so hard just being an adult, like let alone a single parent.
I know. I love how we've widened this. It's like, let's talk about being human beings in this world is where we've gotten.
Like I'm 48 years old and only, I think this year, like forget about pandemic, forget about divorce, but this year for some reason, it's been incredibly evident that it sucks being the adult. It sucks so bad.
It's why it's what I weighed as I was like thinking about whether to get a divorce or not. Cause you're like, no matter how bad it may get in certain places, there is still that phone call you can make and that, arm that you can snuggle into or that, it's that person you can hide behind when you need to hide behind them. Like that's so useful.
It is. And like, what we were talking about with the kids, like in their anxiety, like they react differently to different parents. And like, sometimes it's better with one parent or the other, or like, I mean, for me, I think my kids feel comfortable expressing their anxiety to me or with me because they know that I feel the same. And with their dad, like, my daughter tries to control him and like, he stresses her out he like is so like, there's a reason we were together and it's because where I'm uptight, he's very chill. And that stresses her out. Like when he's chill about something that she needs him to be uptight about, like being on time or like doing the thing that he said he was going to do. There's a benefit in that, like twosomeness, or like even being able to like take both sides of your parents, like in the way that they complement each other as the kid and like use them both at the same time because it's helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so I also find it really interesting what you just told me about like growing up, how you were like, you were more anxious around your mom, even though your dad was the one who was probably, not coming through quite as often.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And yet you're not, but there's no expectation around him. It's hard to disappoint somebody who's disappointed you.
Oh, that's not true. I disappointed him.
You're right. I like to make blanket statements of which I know nothing about. The thing I keep reminding myself, and this is something that I think about all the time, because when your kids have anxiety, at least for me, the thing I think immediately is, what am I doing to this kid? And with me, like my son's adopted. I was there at birth when he was born, which is amazing. So like he's it's been, a journey from the beginning, but there is still occasionally when something like a big divorce happens or something like that pops into my head where I'm like, he could have had a different dad and that dad might, and I'm like, that dad maybe wouldn't have done this, or that dad maybe wouldn't have gotten divorced, or maybe, when you're a biological kid, you're stuck with this world. This was the only thing that you were going to get. But with him, his birth mother picked us. And so, and I do very much feel like I have a responsibility to his birth mother, because she did pick us. And this is where we're parents and caretakers at the same time. And then I think, well, my parents were together up until when my father, passed this year. Like they were together 50 odd years.
Right.
And I'm as anxious as the next person. Like have just as many issues. I've struggled with just as many things as anybody else, as you have. Like everybody has a hole in their heart somewhere. Everybody has something they're dealing with. And we feel when we're messing up or like we're dealing with our, we see anxiety in our kids. We're like, well, we're messing up what would have been a perfect kid.
Oh, stop. I want to tell you, you're talking about anxiety as if it's something you can cause. And that is where you're totally fucking wrong. Like, this is just a way your brain is made. Like, and when you think about it as like cavemen, and you think that there was some benefit to some caveman ages and ages ago who were hypersensitive and they were on alert all of the time and their brains kept the rest of the cavemen alive. Like, I tend to try to think about it that way. It's like my hypervigilance, which is closely related to anxiety and ADHD, by the way, which I'm sure you know, it is not something that I could have had an absolutely perfect life, perfect childhood with parents who never got divorced. They're exactly who I need, and I would still have anxiety. It's just my brain chemistry, and that's it. Like, you would never see that about depression. Like, if your son was depressed and there was nothing you could do to fix it, you would never be like, oh, I guess I really made him sad. You would think of it as, this is a brain chemistry issue that we need to help. And I think that's one of the things with anxiety that I actually get really angry about, obviously. Like, I got very emotional when I just reacted to that. But it feels to a lot of other people outside, it's not taken as seriously as something like depression is, even though it's something that, it has such a huge emotional impact on people. But it also feels like it's the kind of thing that people want you to get control of, oh, why are you worried? Like, because the idea of worry and anxiety are so closely related in our lexicon, it does a huge disservice to people who have anxiety, because it's not that I'm just worried. And if I just didn't worry so much, my anxiety would go away. It's that my brain is wired differently. End of story.
Which then says that just like with depression, there's coping mechanisms, not fixing mechanisms. It's not something you're looking to fix, it's looking to cope with. Yeah. And that's, that's been the hardest thing for me dealing with my son, where it's just like, I want to fix it. Yeah. I want it to be better and gone. And I feel guilt when it happens, and I know I shouldn't, but I still do. And I just want to fix it.
Well, and you're not going to fix his brain.
I'm not going to fix it. Well, I know, but it's like, there's knowing something and feeling something, and those are two different things. I know it, but I don't always feel it. And I think part of it is because I have anxiety myself, and this is something that can feed into it. But part of it is also, and this is probably me, and so I'm not speaking for anybody else when I say that, but when you get divorced, especially when you're one like I did who instigated it, there's guilt around that. And sometimes when you feel that guilt, you look around for manifestations of that guilt, for things that will support that guilt and make you think like, oh, well, I was right, to feel guilty. And seeing my son,
look at what it's done to my child.
Exactly. And I look at my son and I'm like, oh, well, this, backs up the guilt I feel like. And so,
well, then just know you're being stupid, because that's
and I know that. I know that. Even though I know if we had stayed together, it would be exponentially worse. And I know that as a fact. Yep. So I know all of that.
So why don't you try to hang on to that bit? Because that's the thing I think about too. Like, there's obviously times when I think, God, it would have just been easier if I just sucked it up and stayed in that marriage that was making me miserable, or like we were cyclically miserable, and great, the in between cycles. But I know for a fact that if we had stayed together, and my kids as they grew up had to hear us fighting, and we thought, we didn't think we were being clever, but like we'd go into the bedroom and they would hear,
they hear everything.
They hear everything. They know everything.
There are no secrets.
The amount of relief that I think my kids have for never, ever having to hear those fights ever since the time they were like 12, 13 years old is, I think, immeasurable. Like and I think that I would, if I were you, that's how I would try to think about it. Like think about all the things you spared him.
Yeah.
It sounds like your anxiety is working on you to like, and it's like putting it on your kid. Like, oh, my anxiety is confirming that I fucked him up. Like my anxiety is confirming that I ruined my marriage. Like all of those things are probably deeply related to your anxiety.
This is why I'm in therapy. But what's helping me is one, being in a relationship the past year has really helped me. Like, I don't think, as we kind of spoke before, it's not, you don't get into a new relationship to solve your problems. Like but what it has at least done is given me somebody who I care about to
do better,
who's also a single parent, who will see it from a third party perspective and be like, all right, you're being crazy. And, that is helpful.
Like, I don't have the instinct to have anybody else help me feel anything or fix anything. Even if I were in a new relationship, maybe it would be nice, but it wouldn't be something that I sought in them. But the thing that actually helps me is physically exercising helps your brain. And I am not an exercise person, but thinking of, setting a plan for yourself. And I think this is probably true for our kids too. It's like, but it's, it's different. Like you have to figure out what works for them. But for me, like I quit the job that was making me crazy because I was having panic attacks every day going into the subway. And I started walking every mile of the city that I could. And I started therapy and like those things together. And my next option was like, if this isn't going to work, I'm going to medicate. And like, I'm not going to feel bad about it because I felt very guilty around needing to call a therapist and potentially needing medication. This is just what happens in anxiety brains. Maybe it happens in depression brains and other things too. But for me, it was just like, I felt weak, needing help.
I think that is pretty common. I won't make it generational, but I'm making it generational. Our generation, we were taught to suck it up and rub some dirt in it.
And I think the benefit, like to your point, I think you're totally right. The benefit that your son has is that this, that you have anxiety and that you are capable of giving him the tools and resources to make him feel better. And it's not going to be instant and it's not going to make his anxiety go away. But if you give him the tools because you had it and you know intimately how it feels, he's going to be so much better than he would if he had, who knows what other parents. So I feel terrible that you feel that way about like the adoption. I totally get it. Like that's definitely.
It's irrational, 100% irrational.
It is.
And I, to the point where I'm pronouncing it irrational, which isn't how you pronounce it. That's how irrational it is.
Irrational. You get it.
But it's one of those things where initially I was afraid to admit that I felt that way because it just felt so weird. But as I started admitting it, it's a way to lance a wound that if I admit it and it feels, you realize how ridiculous it is. Like we can then talk about it and I can get reactions from people being like,
definitely.
And I think learning with an anxious brain, at least my form of anxiety, being able to admit the crazy thoughts I have helps everyone else put into perspective for me, not that they're crazy, but that they are, that they are things that I might be creating. Yeah. And that has been helpful.
I think that's the thing about therapy. Like, not necessarily that, like, my therapist told me to, like, name the parts of my body that felt okay, like, in the moment that I was, like, I don't think it's necessarily that helps me. And the thing that I think helps me most of all is exactly what you said, is, like, once you name the fear, you completely neuter it. So when I am having a heart attack, I will tell somebody, I'm having a heart attack right now. I feel bad. And they're like, okay. But you're fine.
I think you and I have the same sense of humor. I would do the same thing.
Or like my brain tumor is acting up, like whatever. Making fun of it actually is a thing. Like I don't actually take this. It feels terrible and it's very, very serious in the moment. But I try to take it too seriously because humor and naming the thing, like I don't know why, it's like slaying a monster, like you said. It's when you call the thing into existence and it can show that it in actuality doesn't exist. It's an amazingly powerful tool. And I think that if you do that with your kid, like, that's great. Like, tell me what's wrong.
Nothing is going to help your anxiety better than be able to name it with me, and we can kind of put it into perspective. So how do we get to that point? And so that's the bit I'm trying to work on the most is like, how do we put, not to mock it, not to minimize it, but just, let's just name it. And, you know, what are you anxious about? What are you really anxious about? Because he will often say it's something that has nothing to do with what he's actually anxious about. Like, he will deflect all the time. And it's not that, because the same thing would have happened a week before. He didn't care. I know I can see on your face, you're like, you are making assumptions right now.
You are making assumptions, and it's fine. And like, I never think about like the thing that's really making me anxious. Like, cause the panic is, or when it's panic attacks, particularly, the panic is so immediate and not necessarily triggered by anything that has anything to do with anything else. Like, I was having, I mean, I've lived in New York City for almost 25 years, and I would take the subway every single day. And suddenly I started having panic attacks because people were too close to me, or the train was stopping between stations. And like, this is something that I had been dealing with for over 20 years. And it shouldn't have been something that created anxiety and panic in me. But like, that is the thing that was causing it. Like, my brain had latched onto something and then catastrophized and then created this like cascade. So was I stressed out that my mother-in-law had cancer, and that meant like my ex was going down to see her, and I was alone, single parenting with a very demanding full-time job, and the job was stressful and I didn't like all of those things contributed to anxiety, and also like hormonal shifts. Like, that is something to think about too. That all of those factors together, might not be something that he's really worried about. It could just be a lot of factors together that are contributing to the feeling.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. It's just like, he will often latch onto the thing that's he probably feels like he has the most control over. Totally. So he will latch onto, you didn't wash your hands when you went to the bathroom, or I didn't hear it. And
about you?
That's why, about me. Oh. And that's why I'm anxious right now. You've got to go in and wash your hands, and then I won't be anxious anymore. And I'm like, I don't think that's the main reason he's anxious. I think it's the thing that he can control, maybe, out of all and maybe that does make him anxious. But I also sometimes think it's the thing that he can exert some control over, and he can't exert control over so many other things. Yeah. And so,
control is
it's
super tied to anxiety, for sure.
Oh, I mean, it is the watchword. Like, and I think control, especially for kids of, especially kids of divorce, you have no control, because if you had control, your parents would still be together. Yeah. So you got no control. And so how do you exert all of this control? And I found that what I do is, and I don't know if this is right or not, but, he has certain rules that he would like me to follow. And so I follow them. And these are like, just simple things of like, I didn't close the door to the bathroom all the time, because why? It's just the two of us. But he's like, you need to close the door to the bathroom. We need you to close the door. And so I close the door to the bathroom. And so he asks for something and he gets it.
Yep. My son wanted us to store the glasses upside down, because we didn't know if spiders were getting in the glasses while they were in the cabinet. And it's like, okay, I'll store them upside down. Doesn't matter. He doesn't sleep in his bed. Like, they have bunk beds, because we live in New York City, and it's a 2-bedroom apartment, and it's very expensive. But he doesn't sleep in his. He slept in the top bunk, and he doesn't sleep there. He hasn't slept there like in a year and a half or two, and it's because of spiders. And like, okay, you can sleep on the couch. Like, doesn't, like, he picks up his clothes. Like, there's definitely things that I agree that and this may not be therapeutic advice or helpful, but remember, Scott and I aren't doctors. We're just sharing.
Yes, by the way, not doctors.
Here.
100% not doctors.
We're just sharing our own experience. It might not be what, somebody recommends, but like, if it makes him feel better and it alleviates that anxiety, like, I know, and he had serious like arachnophobia when he was like almost jumped out of the car one time because there was a spider in the car. Like, it was, you saying like, it's just a little spider, there's nothing doesn't matter. Like, it means nothing. So I know he's gotten better over time. I know he's dealt with this fear way better over time. But it's like, if he says like, the bed is dusty and it's making me sneeze, but it really means like, and there were spiders up there that he had killed, I don't care. Like, no. And it's okay. And it's, I mean, personally, like my anxiety about the subway was really high. And after the pandemic, when people were like, okay, time to start coming back into the office, I was like, fuck, I cannot get on a train again because that means
I know.
So what I do, I walk 2.5 miles in the morning so that I can walk to the ferry, get on the ferry, and then walk the rest of it. My anxiety is different when I'm coming home. I can get on the subway when I'm coming home, but like you accommodate things that are within your control.
There's nothing wrong with a coping mechanism. Like I do. And what's interesting, I find, is like, once again, generationally, like my mom does not understand why I, allow some of my son's coping mechanisms, because to her mind, I mean, she's from the mountains of Virginia. Like to her mind is, get it done. Yeah. And in a very nice way. She's going to listen to this. She's going to be so mad at me.
Yeah. It's just like a suck it up. Yeah. Suck it up.
But it's like saying, hey, why can't you control yourself? And I'm like, well, this is him controlling himself. Yeah. Like this is sucking it up in his way. Yeah. You give in a little bit so that you can move forward. Yep. And so I have no problem with some of these there are certain coping mechanisms where it's like, he was sucking on his fingers and we had to stop that. And like certain things where you had to figure out how you can, redirect the coping mechanism into something that you can do more long-term in this world. But there are things that he does to feel better. Is it pulling out the little
curly bits of your hair at the top of your head? Because when you find a good one and you can get it.
It's funny you say you have anxiety. I'm like, I have anxiety. And I'm like, I'm trying to think of the one person I know who doesn't. I cannot think of anyone who doesn't have some level of anxiety. It's just, like you said, it's this human thing. And sometimes I think the difference is the amount admit to yourself you have it more than, do you have it or not? And some people I think are better at compartmentalizing than others.
Well, I only know people who are related to me that have it. And I feel like I've made friends with people who don't. Like my entire world is like surrounded with people who don't have anxiety,
really?
Which, I don't know why. Like I didn't even think of that until like I was just trying to think of a friend who might have anxiety.
I attract people with anxiety, maybe is the answer.
I'm just related to them. Through DNA.
But I would say I would probably not equate my anxiety with your anxiety. I think what I deal with self-flagellation a lot more than I deal with anxiety. Okay. I deal with guilt more than I do. I mean, I am the most Jewish, non-Jewish person you will ever meet. Everyone thinks I'm Jewish. I just have this like aura of Judaism. I walk through the park and those Hasidic Jews always come up to me going, "You Jewish? Are you Jewish?" Are you, like all the time. Jewish? Are you Jewish? You're Jewish? And I'll be like, no. They're like, no. Yeah, but are you Jewish? Like they'll follow
what
me.
About
They're
a
like,
grandmother?
There's no way. Somebody got scared during the Holocaust and changed it on Ellis Island. Somebody did something, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And so I know, my accent just went all over the place there, but I know that somewhere in my past there is definitely Judaism, but like I have that self-flagellation and the guilt is probably where mine comes from. But I guess the reason I say that is not so much to like, be like, hey, everybody's clinically anxious. I think it's just more like everybody needs coping mechanisms and there's nothing wrong or odd about coming up with a coping mechanism that gets you through something difficult.
Totally.
And if your kid has it, it doesn't mean that they are doing something that needs to be completely,
corrected,
ironed out of them.
Well, I think that's the thing to like keep in mind is like, does your child's or your own coping mechanism then become the unhealthy thing? Like when you said the thing about the hand washing, I'm like, ooh, that's a little bit OCD too. Like, again, not a doctor, not diagnosing your kid, but as somebody with anxiety who knows very much about medical situations because of my own anxiety, I think that's the thing to keep in mind is like, does the coping mechanism then become the unhealthy thing? And if it's like for me, I'm walking 6 to 8 miles a day. I'm okay with that.
Nothing unhealthy about that. Well, and I would say with my son, like he doesn't wash his hands 30 times. He just wants me to wash my hands. So it's not about this kind of OCD need to control himself.
Can I analyze that a little bit?
Oh, okay.
No, it's just he's worried about you. You are the thing that's providing safety and care. And if you don't wash your hands and you get sick, that means a lot to him.
I mean, I think you are right. I think I get no leeway. Like, you are the rock, and anything that shifts that rock left or right, that causes more anxiety than anything else in the world. I guess you have to give yourself grace that it's an education, and you're just doing your best.
Well, I hope you don't fuck it up, Scott.
Well, why don't we end it on that station ID apparently that we just did.
It's just so apt in so many situations.
Well, it is. I'm very proud of the title of this because it is how I feel all the time and how I know we both feel. But like, I will say that this conversation has been so helpful to me. Hearing your perspective on this has been so helpful to me.
Oh, I'm glad.
That's what I really love about these conversations, and I hope our audience likes it too. But we get two people to listen to it, and I'm like, all right, I'm fine, because it is just so helpful for me to hear that perspective on mental health, and like with your kids and stuff. You're in your bubble, and not ever the people that you talk to understand what you're going through, or they don't understand the nuances of what you're going through, or their perspectives from their own lives are just so different. It's just nice to hear that perspective that helps me turn around and hopefully be a better parent until I mess up again.
And I think that, I know we're wrapping up here, but so I'm not trying to drag it out farther, but like, we're okay with telling the truth about things. And I think that whether that reflects poorly on us because we're shit parents or whatever it might be, I think that in just knowing the truth about somebody else who's going through something that feels like, relatable, like it relieves a lot of guilt. Yeah. Really.
Yeah. Well, there's not the word for a single parent. You take out single parent and put guilt. Like that is, to me, the operating feeling when you're a single parent under everything else is guilt, because whether you made the decision to do it or not, there was another path that you didn't take. And this is the path you've taken. You have to live with that path, but you'll always feel guilt that you took that path because you brought your children along with you on the ride. And it probably was the right decision. It probably was the best thing you could do. But, knowing something is true and feeling something is true are often two very different things. And
you are a closeted Jew, aren't you?
I know. I really am.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. Leave a like or a crazy comment. We'd love to hear from you, and see you again soon.